What's up, guys? Happy Wednesday! Welcome back to The Attachment Confessions. My name is Chelsea, and I am super pumped to have you here with me today for episode 19. In case you're new to The Attachment Confessions, let me fill you in really quick on what the pod is all about. From the moment I discovered attachment science, literally everything about every relationship I had ever been in finally made sense. And now I'm figuring out what it takes to earn my attachment security and have the best possible relationships from now on. Here on the Attachment Confessions, we'll be diving into all things attachment science while you guys tag along on my attachment healing adventure. My hope is that by bringing attachment science to those of you who have never heard of it before, and by sharing my own story, you'll also be inspired to set out on your own attachment healing journey. Guys, I have a huge announcement to make, and I am still 1,000% in shock, like jaw on the floor status. Okay, so Million Podcasts recently came out with their top podcasts. And get this, The Attachment Confessions has been listed as one of the best 30 attachment theory podcasts in the US. Like, what actually just came out of my mouth? We ranked number 24 on their list. What? Like, I am absolutely flabbergasted. As the great Gwen Stefani would say, this ish is bananas. Bananas. Never, ever in my wildest dreams did I think I'd ever be on any best of lists. Not to mention being recognized alongside some of the leading experts on attachment theory, Thais Gibson, who I've referenced in several of my episodes. She came in at number one. No surprise there. Y'all, I'm truly in shock and unbelievably honored that this podcast that I am so freaking passionate about has received this type of recognition. All glory to God, though. I mean, I've said this before, I will say it again. This podcast is his podcast. But also, this wouldn't have been possible without you, my Confessions fam. I know it can sound super gimmicky asking you guys to rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends, but y'all taking a minute to do those things seriously makes such a difference. You're not only supporting this podcast, but more importantly, you're helping others learn about themselves and their relationships, which ultimately leads to growth and improving their lives. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And major shout out to Million Podcasts. I'm so grateful that you managed to somehow stumble upon the Attachment Confessions and give it this level of recognition. I'll put a link to the article in the show notes if you want to check it out, along with the other featured podcasts in the attachment theory category, or any of the other categories, honestly. Million Podcasts is a great way to discover podcasts to listen to on tons of different topics. So, yeah, check out the link in the show notes. Alrighty, let's switch gears and get into today's topic. I've received a few requests from you guys asking me to dedicate full episodes to really digging into each attachment style separately. Well, ask and you shall receive. In case you're new to the Attachment Confessions, the science of attachment refers to the attachment style we form in childhood due to the emotional and physical attunement level or lack thereof of our parents or primary caregivers. This formed attachment style then goes on to shape and predict how we behave in romantic relationships for the rest of our lives, which is pretty astounding because attachment formation typically happens between 0 to 5 years of age. So mind blowing. Every single person on the planet falls within one of 4 attachment styles. There are 3 insecure attachments and 1 secure attachment. Now, unfortunately, secure attachment is less common than falling into one of the 3 insecure attachments. However, since attachment is learned, the freaking incredible thing about all of this is that an insecure attachment can be unlearned. which is precisely why you're here listening to the Attachment Confessions today. I've been on my attachment healing journey over the past several months to earn my attachment security. And if you also have an insecure attachment, you, my friend, can earn your attachment security too. Don't get me wrong, it takes a ton of introspection, learning, and intentional hard work practicing specific metacognitive tools in order to create new neural pathways in your brain. But although that sounds very daunting, it can be done. Thank you, Lord. So, since y'all have asked me to unpack each attachment even further, today's episode is going to be all about our anxious preoccupieds. If you're anxiously attached or have a history of dating someone with an anxious attachment, listen up because we're about to get deep with our APs. Let's start out by recapping how the anxious preoccupied attachment style forms in childhood. Intermittent reinforcement. So, what exactly does that mean? Inconsistent caregiving. Essentially, the child experienced emotional attunement one moment, emotional neglect the next. Sometimes your needs were met with love, warmth, and attention, other times with absence or neglect. Now, the word neglect can make it sound really awful, like a form of abuse or negligence, but it's not necessarily that extreme. The anxious preoccupied learned as a child that love was available, but very unpredictable. And because of this, their nervous system developed hypervigilance in order to capture those windows of availability. It's so fascinating because as a very young child, their brain developed a hyperactivation strategy, amplifying distress signals like screaming or crying in order to increase the likelihood of receiving care and attention. Think about it though. If something you need for survival is scarce, and whether or not you'll receive it is highly unpredictable, it makes total sense that you would be on high alert and do whatever necessary to increase your survival chances. The formation of an anxious attachment was how their nervous system adapted in order to get their needs met in a challenging, unpredictable environment. Now, there are a number of ways that a child can experience intermittent reinforcement, thus creating their anxious preoccupied attachment. One way could be that their parents or primary caregivers worked a lot, or their job involved a lot of travel away from the home. This extended absence is a form of intermittent reinforcement because there are periods of time when the child receives emotional and physical attunement, followed by periods of time that they're not. This ping ponging between receiving attention, then having it taken away, creates anxiety within the child because whether or not they will have their emotional needs met is highly unpredictable. Or maybe the child grew up in a home with lots of siblings where they were constantly having to fight for their parents' time and attention. Or perhaps an aging grandparent moved into the house and the focus shifted to that grandparent's needs more than the child's. Another way that a child can experience intermittent reinforcement is when they have one parent that is highly attuned to their emotional needs, think like helicopter parent, and the other parent is not, like they're more emotionally withdrawn. When the child experiences overtly high levels of emotional attunement from one parent and very little to no emotional attunement from the other, this type of intermittent reinforcement can create an anxious preoccupied attachment in the child. When children experience connection with their parents or primary caregivers, this releases oxytocin as well as other feel good neurochemicals in the brain. However, the sporadic release, aka intermittent reinforcement, of these feel good neurochemicals in the brain is actually what creates addiction. It's the same way that someone becomes addicted to alcohol, drugs, gambling, pornography, whatever the vice, you fill in the blank. The high, then the crash, then the high again, and the crash again, and so on and so forth. That right there is intermittent reinforcement. So, for someone who's formed an anxious preoccupied attachment, that emotional intermittent reinforcement they experienced in childhood quite literally creates an addiction in their brain. Addiction to love, which goes on to explain the anxious preoccupied's primary attachment wound, the fear of abandonment and the core belief that I'm not enough. This fear, coupled with their core belief, is what plagues them throughout all their romantic relationships and can even show up some in friendships and other types of relationships too. However, our attachment style patterns are most prominent in our romantic relationships because those are typically the deepest relationships that we have. Okay, now that we have the foundation laid of how the anxious preoccupied attachment is formed, along with their primary attachment wound, let's chat through some of the characteristics and patterns of behavior they tend to portray throughout their romantic relationships. Because the AP's number one fear is abandonment, and their core belief is that they simply aren't enough, they have an excessive need for closeness and chronically worry about their partner's feelings towards them. This often goes on to create codependent dynamics within their relationships. Being codependent essentially means that the only way they can feel okay internally is if their partner is okay. And they take the responsibility of making sure their partner is okay onto themselves. The way the anxious preoccupied does this is by totally self abandoning their own wants and needs in the relationship. The AP will change as a person from partner to partner. Their new partner is obsessed with camping or sports or particular music genre or political party or dogs instead of cats. Well, suddenly the AP takes a deep interest in those things too. They will morph into whatever and whoever they believe their partner wants them to be. But this is a subconscious strategy in order to create connection, maintain closeness, and keep their partner by their side, aka mitigating any risk of abandonment at all costs. In childhood, the emotional intermittent reinforcement from their parents conditioned the AP to believe that in order to receive their parents' attention and approval, they needed to self abandon their own needs and fixate more on their parents. This is how they held on to that connection they so desperately desired. And that same level of self abandonment gets carried forward into their romantic relationships. They believe they have to put on a performance in order to earn love and attention. If they sing and dance in just the right way, exactly how they think their partner will like it, then the likelihood of them leaving is lessened. Another characteristic of the AP is the trauma response they tend to go into. Anytime conflict arises, every single one of us is programmed to go into one of the following trauma responses. There's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. For the anxious preoccupied, their automatic trauma response tends to be fawn. Fawning is essentially falling on your own sword, over apologizing, and nuzzling up to your partner in order to make the conflict dissipate so that the relationship can quickly return back to homeostasis, which is the state of balance and stable equilibrium, aka normalcy. So, for example, say the anxious preoccupied senses a rise in tension between them and their partner because a disagreement took place. Even if the AP wasn't the one that initiated the disagreement or was just simply expressing their own opinions or feelings, if they sense their partner isn't pleased with them in any way, they will immediately backtrack and over apologize. Even if their partner was blatantly in the wrong, rude, or said or did some really hurtful, messed up things, the anxious preoccupied will fawn like their life depends on it because sticking to their guns or expressing how something made them feel could mean losing the connection with their partner. They're known for being the peacemaker. They will give anything to totally avoid or diminish conflict because ruffling feathers might lead to their biggest fear coming to fruition. Like I said earlier, they will do, say, or become anything in order to avoid abandonment. Now, hear me when I say all insecure attachments have their upsides as well as their downsides, great qualities and not so great. We'll chat through the positives in a bit, don't worry. But first, let's look into some of the sabotaging behaviors of the anxious preoccupied. Since APs view love as something that can disappear at any moment, therefore creating their hypervigilant nervous system, they're constantly seeking proof that they're still wanted by their partner. Because of this, they tend to come across as overly needy or clingy. They excessively attempt to reestablish connection with their partner when they sense any distance because their nervous system interprets distance as possible danger. Since their attachment operating system runs on high alert, they're constantly processing their partner's behavior toward them through a filter of potential rejection. Because of this, anxious preoccupieds crave constant closeness and connection with their partner. It's an amazing feeling to be wanted and loved, right? But the excessive need that APs have for closeness can actually be quite suffocating for their partner. The nonstop texting, calling, need for reassurance, validation, and desire to basically be attached at the hip to their partner oftentimes results in the very thing they are so desperately afraid of happening, their partner leaving them. It's basically a self fulfilling prophecy, and it's so heartbreaking to witness. On episode 4, we had attachment specialist Bree Cleary on, and how she described the anxious preoccupied's behavior patterns in relationships really stuck with me. Bree gave us the illustration of the octopus versus the turtle. The AP is the octopus, and the turtle is the partner with a more avoidant attachment. The closer the AP gets to the avoidant, the further they are actually pushing their partner away. Think of all the tentacles of the octopus, aka the anxious preoccupied. One of the tentacles represents overtexting, the other is calling all the time. The other is them constantly questioning their partner. Do you still love me? Do you find other people attractive? Do you wish I was brunette instead of blonde? Do you think I'm fat or ugly? Do you miss your ex? Why did it take you 37 seconds to text me back? Yada, yada, yada. Another tentacle is them getting insecure, jealous, or possessive anytime their partner wants some space or to hang out with their friends, etc. As all of those tentacles reach closer and closer to the turtle, aka their partner, this creates emotional withdrawal and eventual detachment from the AP. The more anxious the AP's behavior gets, the more they're causing their partner to dissociate and disconnect from them, which then creates more anxiety in the AP. The nerd term for this is recursive, meaning the behaviors feed off of each other, but in this case, in very, very negative ways. This back and forth cycle is what creates toxicity in their relationships and can ultimately lead to its demise. The AP's anxious behaviors are what drive their partner away, yet being abandoned is their biggest fear. This is why learning about attachment science is so important. Once we become aware of our attachment styles, we're then able to see clearly how we've gone wrong in relationships and what we can do moving forward to ensure that we don't keep repeating the same sabotaging patterns. Another way that the AP's sabotaging behaviors affect them is the self abandonment aspect. When we lack boundaries and abandon our own wants and needs, especially the longer the relationship goes on, this actually creates resentment. The longer this resentment builds, the more dissatisfied the anxious preoccupied actually is with the relationship. Now, trust me, APs can go a very long time, like many, many years, focusing on their partner's happiness in the relationship. Because as long as their partner's happy and has no complaints, they shouldn't have a reason to leave, right? But eventually, all those needs that have been stuffed down and buried throughout the relationship will eventually come to surface. Resentment is a tough place to come back from. So it's better to express your needs than to just simply act like you don't have any. And just going along with whatever your partner wants all the time actually causes your partner to lose respect for you. Having healthy boundaries is necessary in all relationships because self abandonment is ultimately destructive to both parties involved and the relationship as a whole. If you're with someone who doesn't value your needs in a relationship, that's your sign that you're with the wrong person anyway. Being single is so much better than feeling empty and alone when you're sitting literally 2 feet apart on the couch next to someone, just for the sake of saying you have a partner, when in all actuality, it feels nothing like a true partnership. Trust me, I've been there. It freaking sucks. Especially when you're in a scenario where you've basically ghosted everyone in your life for your partner that now also feels like a ghost sitting right next to you. And that right there is another heartbreaking pattern of the anxious preoccupied. If you're an AP, I guarantee you've done this before. And let's be honest, you've done this with practically every relationship you've been in. The second you form a connection with someone new, that person now takes precedence over everyone and everything else in your life. Every new partner becomes the priority, and you may as well put your phone on DND for anyone else. It's so hard not to want to spend every waking moment with someone who lights that fire in your heart again. Trust me, I get it. But this is a highly common behavior of APs that makes it so difficult when the relationship ends. You now feel more alone than ever because your partner was basically the only person you focused all your time and energy on. This type of ghosting pattern erodes other relationships in the AP's life, making it difficult to maintain friendships. Eventually, friends realize the only times they're wanted is when an AP is going through a rough time with their partner, going through a breakup, or when they're single, which usually doesn't last long anyway. Once that flame kicks back on for someone new, well, you may as well change their name in your phone to Casper. Okay, I know that was kind of rough. Please hear me when I say I love my APs out there. So pump the brakes on those anxious thoughts you've got running through your mind telling you, wow, that was quite the roast session from Chelsea. She clearly hates me. Like I said, there's pros and cons to all insecure attachments, and I promised y'all we'd also talk about the positives of the anxious preoccupied. So let's pivot to some of the AP's superpowers. First off, APs are so kind and sweet. They are very thoughtful, constantly thinking of ways they can show their partner how much they love and care for them. If you listened to our most recent episode on love languages versus attachment styles, you'll recall that anxious preoccupieds are very affectionate. They're all about giving words of affirmation, spending quality time with their partners, and showing their love through physical touch. The AP puts others ahead of themselves. They're extremely mindful of their partner and will do whatever it takes to make them happy. It brings them joy to go above and beyond for their partner and to see their partner happy and satisfied thanks to the effort they put into the relationship. They're highly emotionally attentive and very empathetic partners. Ultimately, anxious preoccupieds just want to love and be loved. This attachment style got its name because the anxiety they experience due to their core fear of abandonment causes them to self abandon their own desires and become preoccupied with the needs of their partner. They don't go into relationships with ill intentions of pushing their partner away by anxious behaviors taking over. However, their primary fear of abandonment, paired with the core belief that they aren't enough, is what often causes unhealthy patterns to emerge and their relationships go up in flames, resulting in their biggest fear eventually coming true. But APs are more than capable of building secure attachment within themselves and putting an end to this cycle. Rewiring an anxious nervous system is 100% possible. Is it an overnight fix? No, it's not. Does it take dedication and intentional effort and practice? Yes, it certainly does. But something as potentially life impacting as earning your attachment security is worth the time and effort. You're gonna have to decide that you are worth going back and challenging those stories of I'm not enough. There's two paths before you. Both of them are hard. Holding on to an anxious attachment and continuing these patterns, relationship after relationship after relationship, that is hard. Putting the work in to do what's necessary so that you can break those patterns in future relationships, also hard. But as my guy, Dr. John Deloney says, you have to choose your hard. I think we both know which hard path is worth taking. I dedicated an entire episode to filling you guys in on my own attachment healing journey, episode 13. And in that episode, I do a deep dive into attachment expert Dr. Sarah Hensley's 4-week hybrid group coaching program, as well as other resources she offers. If you're serious about breaking attachment behaviors and experiencing secure relationships, listen to that episode if you haven't yet. And check out Dr. Hensley's services at thelovedoc.com. I'll put a link to her services in the show notes for you guys to check out. I'll also put a link to Thais Gibson's website, the Personal Development School. She has tons of resources and a different technique to earning your attachment security, so definitely check her stuff out too. All right, guys, I think that's probably a good stopping point for today. There's so much more we could get into with the Anxious Preoccupied, but we'll get into other aspects of the AP in future episodes. Speaking of future episodes, if you have an anxious preoccupied attachment style, I want to hear from you directly. On episodes 11 and 12, I had Brent Stokes on as a guest to share about his lived experience as a dismissive avoidant. Well, I'm looking for an anxious preoccupied to join me for an in-depth conversation about what it's like living in your AP shoes. So please follow me on Instagram at The Attachment Confessions and send me a DM if you're interested in being considered for coming on to the pod and talking about your personal journey as an anxious preoccupied. It seriously makes my day when I hear from you guys, and the rest of us need to hear your story. So please, if you're an AP, reach out to me. On our next episode, we're going to do a deep dive into the dismissive avoidant, so you won't want to miss it. Although all attachment styles are incredibly fascinating, the DA is the one that gets the most attention, for sure. It's the most predictable attachment style, yet it's the most mind-boggling and often the most frustrating. The world is straight up obsessed with the dismissive avoidant, and having been with a DA myself, I can see why. So be sure to tune in 2 weeks from today for that. Thank you again so much for listening and supporting this podcast. It means the absolute world. I hope y'all have an amazing next couple of weeks, and I'll see you next time right here on the Attachment Confessions. Love you guys. Bye.